Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Jon Named Heir's wedding had been one of the finest weddings that Jon had ever been to. Not that he had been to many in his lifetime. Whenever northern nobles had married, his father would bring Robb or any of his true-born children with him to bless the union, staying for a night before returning. He never brought Jon with him, for obvious reasons. Robb's wedding was the kind of wedding Jon would want if he ever decided to get married. It was a small, simple affair where the soon-to-be man and wife were surrounded by friends and family. Reminiscing, Edmure, and Lady Rosalind stood by Jon, who was at Robb's side. On the other side, Loras and Lady Olenna stood along with Margaery's ladies-in-waiting Sarah and Mira. The only thing Jon would change would be the location. Robb had decided that the wedding would be held in the Septon, where his father and mother had been married some 20 years prior. It had also been to accommodate his new wife and the religion she was comfortable with. Jon knew that Robb would be married again in a proper Godswood, just as any Northman would. Jon was dressed in the same fine clothes he had been in when he had attended Edmure's wedding. A gray doublet with the white wolf outlined on his breast. His dark curls had been washed and his beard trimmed for the event. At his side, like always, was Frost. Robb was dressed similarly to what Edmure had worn. Shining silver mail over a snow-white tabard with the gray direwolf of House Stark emblazoned on his chest. The crown of winter was hidden amongst his curls, the black iron spike standing out amongst the auburn hair. At his side was Claw. Sitting at both of their feet were their direwolves, their pelts thoroughly brushed, much to the animal's annoyance. They had grown to massive proportions, and were not just slightly smaller than ponies. Jon was beginning to wonder if Ghost would grow big enough for Jon to be able to ride him. It was a fanciful thought, but one that Jon was beginning to ponder as the wolf continued to grow. One of Jon's worries about the wedding had been the wedding cloaks. The ceremonial cloaks that both the bride and groom wore. They were not something someone could find in a pinch. They took time to make, and Jon didn't think that there was a Stark or Tyrell cloak made of silk or velvet just lying around. Thankfully, Lady Olenna had already thought of that. Ever since Robb had agreed to the marriage, the Queen of Thorns had put Sarah and Mira, Margaery's handmaidens, to work creating the cloaks. They had finished them on the journey to Riverrun. When Margaery entered, Jon heard Robb gasp quietly, and for good reason. The girl known as the Rose of Highgarden was breathtaking to look at. Her hair had been braided and put up to show off her heart-shaped face, which had a minimal amount of makeup on. She wore a light green dress with white vines and flowers running down the fabric, and was fashioned similar to the dresses she wore in the south that showed off her flawless skin and graceful figure. The Tyrell cloak she wore seemed to flow like a river of green and gold behind her, as she was escorted forward by Garland, who was dressed in his finery and looked proud to be at his sister's side. When Margaery and Garland were close, Robb stepped forward, folding his hands in front of him. "Who is here to be married in the light of the Seven?" the Septon asked formally, starting the ceremony. "Lady Margaery, Tyrell," Garland answered strongly. "Who is here to receive her?" "Robb Stark of House Stark," Robb said firmly, taking a small step forward. Garland nodded and turned to his sister, giving her a small hug and giving her hand to Robb before joining his family. Robb and Margaery, now hand in hand, moved to stand in front of the Septon, looking at each other with small smiles on their faces as they went through the ceremony. The Septon blessed the couple in the light of the Seven, making brief prayers to the father, the mother, the warrior, the maiden, the smith, the crone, and the stranger. The Septon had wanted to give the king in the north and his new bride a full wedding that would have involved singing and candles and other things that Jon found nonsensical. The old man had thought that he could convert the northern king to the true faith, but a private word from the Queen of Thorns had put the man in his place. It would be a simple ceremony, and the Septon was wise to keep it that way. Finally, at the end of the priest's prayers, he had asked Robb to cloak his new bride. Garland stepped forward and took the Tyrell cloak from Margaery's shoulders, folding it over his arm as Robb replaced it with his own, signifying that he was putting Margaery under his protection. The couple said a few more words, required by the Septon, and kissed happily when prompted. The small group cheered happily for the newlyweds, filling the room with applause as Robb took Margaery's hand, walking her out of the sept with the others following close behind. Line break. The pie that had been baked for Robb's and Margaery's marriage had been excellent, The cook, having found out the night before the wedding, had been up most of the night figuring out the dishes that he would serve to the small party. The first had been a meat pie, the traditional meal that served as the centerpiece for many high-born weddings throughout Westeros. The pies were usually filled with live birds that would have been released when the pastry was cut into, but that had been another tradition that the Queen of Thorns had done away with in the name of urgency. Instead, the pie was filled with savory chicken and cooked vegetables smothered in a delicious gravy. Served with the pie had also been an assortment of cooked vegetables, crusty bread, and fresh fruit. The refreshments had been a mixture of black beer, a drink usually consumed in the north, and an arbor wine that the late Hoster Tully had been storing for special occasions. All in all, it had been a perfect meal for the small party. Jon pushed his plate away, feeling the slight discomfort of a full stomach. The combined families of Tellys, Tyrells, and Starks had been sitting around a circular table. Robb and Margaery sat next to each other, with Brendan and Loras on either side of them. Then it was Garland, Edmure, and Roslyn, with Jon and Olenna rounding out the table. "I must say I am surprised the man did not cook a single fish," Lady Olenna commented dryly. Jon smiled. "I've been told that he hails from the Fingers, and that he ate fish all the time as a child. He's very good at cooking it, but hates doing so." The Queen of Thorns snorted lightly, taking a small bite from a fig. The old woman had demanded a platter of cheese, figs, and dates for herself. Given her fondness for the food, her demand had been smartly followed. "I understand that you are heading north," Olenna said, looking at Jon. Jon nodded. "I am," he said, his goodwill fading slightly. "My brother has put me in command of the Northern Lords." "Most men would sound quite pleased with such a position," Olenna commented, noting the tone of reservation in the young warrior's voice. "Command of a significant portion of the king's host with an important task of saving the king's mother. Most men I know would kill for that position." Jon tilted his head, glancing towards his brother, who was laughing quietly with his new bride. In the quick lead-up to the wedding, Robb had come out of his shell of despair, a reward for Margaery's continued perseverance, dragging Robb out. He now laughed and smiled like he used to. It made Jon happy to see his brother do so. "I am honored that my brother has such confidence in me," Jon said slowly, turning back to look at the older woman. "But I can't help but think that there are others who are more worthy of leading the army. Lord Hawker, for instance." The War Eagle, Lord Tarley's long-lost twin." Olenna scoffed. "Did his grace give you a reason for putting you in command?" Jon nodded quickly. "He said that he wanted me in the north to make sure Lady Stark is safe because he couldn't be there." Lady Olenna patted Jon's arm lightly. "And there's the point you're missing," she said. "There are few people you can trust more than family. You are the king's brother, you were raised with the same morals, and you know what the king would do in certain situations." Jon nodded, still hesitant. Olenna went on. "What I am trying to say is that, while some men might do what's best for the army, you will do as your brother commands and make sure that Lady Stark is the main priority," she explained. Jon nodded again, this time more firmly. "Aye, that makes sense," he said quietly. "Cheer up, my dour Northmen. You are more than capable of retaking the north," Lady Olenna said cheerfully, popping another fig into her mouth and swallowing. "You have a group of experienced warriors behind you. Don't forget it." Jon snorted. "It'd be hard to, when Lord Umber speaks. I'm sure they hear it at Castle Black," he joked. "Have you thought about marriage yet?" Lady Olenna asked suddenly, catching Jon off guard as he went to take a drink. The northern bastard nearly spit his beer out when he heard the question, but he managed to swallow what was in his mouth and look at the old woman who was looking back at him with an innocent look. "What?" Jon sputtered. Lady Olenna rolled her eyes. "There is some ice in there after all," she muttered before continuing. "Have you thought about marriage? As the brother to the king, it's safe to assume that you will be legitimized at some point. With a face like yours, I expect a line of women will be lining up to catch you." Jon scoffed. "I've never thought about marriage," he admitted. "Never had to. Being a bastard saved me from that." "Surely you must have at some point." Olenna pressed. Jon shook his head. "Never," he replied. "For the past few years I've been wanting to be a man of the Night's Watch. They don't take wives." Olenna shrugged. "Perhaps it's time you start thinking about one," she commented, looking over her small platter of cheese, picking out what she would snack on next. I'm sure my granddaughter can find you many girls from the Reach. Jon laughed lightly. I appreciate the thought, but I'd prefer a northern girl, he said before quickly adding, no offense. Olenna waved aside the apology. None needed. I'm sure not many Northmen would want a wife from the Reach after the debacle with the ex-Lord Mormont. Jon raised an eyebrow. Mormont? Do you mean J.R. Mormont? Olenna shook her head. His son Jorah, she clarified. The man won the tournament of Casterly Rock and became a war hero during the Greyjoy Rebellion. He was quite popular, and his eyes caught a Hightower girl, and hers caught him, and they married, though it was doomed from the beginning. Now Jon remembered the story. He had heard his father Sir Roderick and Maester Luwin talk about it occasionally. Jorah Mormont had been one of the first through the breach at Pike and had been knighted for it. He had then gone on to win the joust at Casterly Rock and had named Lyness Hightower the Queen of Love and Beauty. Not long after, the man sold poachers into slavery, which resulted in him fleeing the north and from the block. He sold poachers into slavery to satisfy his wife, didn't he? Jon asked. Olenna nodded. The Hightower girl had some rather expensive tastes, and it drove the poor fool broke. If I am correct, the man is now a sellsword, and the woman has married a prince in the Free Cities. Lady Margaery does not seem like the kind of girl who would drive Robb to do something like that, Jon commented. Olenna nodded, smiling slightly as she looked at her granddaughter and new grandson. Indeed, they are a rare couple. Their marriage already had love, to begin with. Not many have that, and many never develop it. She makes my brother very happy, Jon agreed with a smile. After all that's happened, he deserves that much. And are you happy? Olenna asked. Jon's smile faltered, something the old woman didn't miss. I am content, he replied, keeping his voice neutral. When Joffrey has been defeated and the war is over, then I will be happy. Like all Northmen, Jon was a terrible liar, and the Queen of Thorns saw right through his words. But she decided to leave the topic alone, not wanting to make the young man more uncomfortable than she already had with her marriage question. She enjoyed playing with the White Wolf, but she knew that there were limits that she could go. He was a very good warrior, if the Blackfish was to be believed, and would give his life for his brother. That kind of loyalty did not come often. He would make a valuable asset to both Robb and Margaery in the future. Yes. The war, Lady Olenna said, dropping the subject of happiness. With luck, no more enemies will appear, and victory will soon be ours. Jon nodded slightly. I do not believe that the Ironborn, nor the treasonous Northerners will cause too much worry, he said quietly. It's my brother going against Tywin Lannister that worries me. Olenna nodded as well. As it should. The man is ruthless and vile. I saw as soon as I met him and looked at those cold green eyes. He's a man everyone should think twice about before facing in battle. Have a little faith, my lady, Robb said from across the table, a smile still on his face. Lord Tywin has never faced me personally. I believe my brother once compared me to a cockroach. I am rather hard to get rid of, he said with a laugh. Jon laughed as well. We were boys, brother, he pointed out. I'm rather surprised you remembered that. It's one of the greatest compliments you've ever given me. Robb joked. Jon, will you join me outside of a moment? Jon raised an eyebrow, the smile still on his face. He nodded and rose from his seat, nodding to Lady Olenna before following his brother out into the hallway. The two walked halfway up a flight of stairs where there was no one around. Is all well? Jon asked curiously, worried that something had happened. Sarah Brendan told me that my mother came to you in the Godswood before she went north. What did she want? Robb asked. Jon rubbed his jaw. She asked me to protect you, he replied, leaving out that she had revealed her true emotions to Jon. Robb sighed, shaking his head. Of course she did, he said quietly. Thank you for being honest. Is that why you asked me out here? Jon asked. Robb shook his head again. No, I have a much different reason for this. As much as I hope to break Tywin's forces, I am well aware of the danger I am walking into. Ice water ran down Jon's back. Robb, what are you trying to say? He asked slowly, trying to keep the worry from his voice. Jon, on the desk in the Lord Solar, there is a scroll addressed to you. You must take it with you when you go north. It is a copy of an order written and signed by me, making you my heir, should I be killed. Robb explained. Jon took a step back down the stairs, looking up at his brother in shock. He struggled to speak, unsure of how to respond. When he was finally able to get words out, Robb stopped him before he could. "I know what you are feeling," he said quietly, "but know that I have to do this. We don't know what happened to Bran or Rickon, but that is just one reason why I have named you my heir. If I fall against Tywin, the others can still rally around you and make sure that the Lannisters are defeated. It also helps that the men already know and respect you. Second, even if Rickon and Bran were alive, they would not be able to lead an army, let alone 4 kingdoms. They are too young. You would be able to fill in until either one of them was old enough to finally take their place." Robb stepped towards Jon, putting both hands on his shoulders and looking him in the eye. "Finally, you are my brother, and I know that you will give your life before you let the Lannisters harm Margaery." "Robb, Once again, Robb stopped him before he could speak. "Please, Jon, do not say that you are unworthy or any of that nonsense. You are my brother, and you have always been my brother." Jon hung his head, still trying to comprehend what his brother was asking him to do. It was like he was being asked to lead an army, but with 10 times the stress, because he was being asked to become king. A thought that had never once entered Jon's mind, not even when it was revealed to him that Rhaegar Targaryen was his father. "Who else knows?" he asked quietly. "Roland Hawker Sarbrandon, Lady Olenna, and Bryce Caron, as well as myself and you, will have copies of my order," Robb explained. "This way, no one can dispute my claim." Robb had come to Lady Olenna with the idea the night before the wedding. She was the one who had insisted on making sure that multiple people knew about the order. "Never put all your eggs in one basket," was the phrase she had used. Jon continued to look at his boots, still thinking over what Robb was telling him. Finally, after a moment, he looked up at his brother. His eyes had a purposeful gleam to them. "I will do as you ask," he promised firmly. Robb grinned, throwing an arm around Jon as they walked back towards the dinner. "Good to hear. I was afraid I was going to smack you in the head and make you see sense," he joked. "Hopefully, we'll never have to use the proclamation." "Then you better not die," Jon responded, pausing for a moment before adding, "The same goes for me." Tyrion 7th. "You look annoyingly happy." Cersei scowled as Tyrion strode into the small council chambers, a skip in the small Lannister's step. Tyrion grinned. "And you're as charming as ever, dear sister," he replied easily. "Not even your beautiful scowling face can threaten my mood." The acting hand of the king had every right to be happy at that particular moment. Over the past week, he had received several messages which had only brought good news for the Lannister cause, which had been on the verge of collapse not too long ago. Now perhaps there was a chance that Joffrey could keep his spoiled ass still planted on the iron monstrosity. Tyrion hopped into his seat, instantly pouring himself a goblet of wine as the other members of the very small council, as Bronn called it, took their seats. Besides the Queen Regent, the only members still present in King's Landing were the Grand Maester and Varys. Baelish was in the Vale, Jaime was imprisoned in River Run, and there had been no candidates named to the Master of Law position. The new Master of Ships, Lord Celtigar, was currently at sea battling the Onion Knight and his small fleet. When the council was assembled, Tyrion spoke first. "My lords, I am happy to say that I have quite a bit of good news," he announced. "My father's plan to marry my niece Princess Marcella to the Martells has worked. Oberyn Martell and 10,000 riders are currently cutting across the southeastern part of the Reach, on his way towards the capital, where he shall turn north and ride to Harrenhal to meet with my father." "Great news indeed," Varys simpered. "It is good to see such great houses like House Lannister and House Martell working together once again." Cersei shot a glare at the eunuch for comparing the Lannisters and the Martells. The daughter of Tywin Lannister had very similar thoughts with her father when it came to where House Lannister stood amongst the other great houses of Westeros. They were first, and there was a very wide margin between them and second. Tyrion continued before his sister could complain and derail the conversation. "Furthermore, my father has managed to turn both House Frey and House Bolton to our side. Lord Bolton is currently in the north, gathering more allies while House Frey holds the twins and Moat Kylan, bearing the Stark boy from his homeland, which is still being ravaged by the Ironborn. I believe the king's proclamation stripping House Stark and House Tully of their titles and status had a part to play in turning the Freys and Boltons," Varys commented. "Nevertheless, Lord Tywin continues to amaze." Tyrion held in a snort. Joffrey's declaration had been made out of spite, as Robb Stark had gained more allies. It had been Tyrion's father who had made it useful, as it turned the Boltons and Freys against their former overlords, turning a boy's jealous complaints into political weapons. Indeed, Pycelle wheezed. His grace must have foreseen that his grandfather would use his proclamation in such a way. What has father promised them in turn? Cersei asked curiously. Tyrion checked his reports before answering. Each house will become Lord Paramounts of their respective homelands. For the Freys, there are a few marriages, squireships, things of that nature. For the Boltons, Lord Bolton's bastard will be legitimized, giving the man an heir. I do have news regarding the Boltons. Varys chimed in again. It seems word of Lord Bolton's cloak turning did not reach Lady Stark. Sarais raised an eyebrow. Explain. She snapped. The Septon Greyjoy, the last son of Balon Greyjoy, seemed to enjoy attacking the north, so much so that he took Winterfell itself. Varys answered. He proclaimed himself Prince of Winterfell, a title he did not hold long as a host of Northmen soon besieged the castle. Get to the point. Cersei barked, tired of the story. Varys simply bowed his head. My little birds tell me the Greyjoy boy tried to buy his freedom by bartering with Lady Stark's freedom. Ramsay Snow, Lord Bolton's natural son, was in command of the army and took both prisoner before burning Winterfell to the ground, killing the Ironborn and all others within. There was only silence that followed the eunuch's story. Winterfell, the heart of the north, the stronghold of the ancient and powerful House Stark, had been burned to the ground by the bastard son of their rival house. For all of Robb Stark's accomplishments thus far in the war, that had to have been another arrow into the young warrior's heart. Send word to Lord Bolton that I want Captain Tully sent here, Cersei ordered, breaking the silence. Not possible, Tyrion countered, shaking his head. Lord Bolton, from my understanding, does not control any ports on either coast. Besides, there are still Ser Davos and his raiders in the Blackwater loyal to Robb Stark. They will most certainly jump at the chance to save the mother of their king. Cersei waved her hand angrily, then strap the woman to a horse and have her brought here down the King's Road. If you think that Robb Stark and his men will not ride through all manner of country and swim through rivers to save Lady Stark, then you are sadly mistaken. Tyrion drawled, wishing that his sister would finally use her brain for once. Lady Stark will stay in the north under Lord Bolton's supervision. After the war, we will decide what to do with her. Now I am curious what our friend Baelish has been up to in the Vale. Tyrion asked, looking at Varys. The man known as the Spider folded his hands over his belly. Lord Baelish, according to my birds, has done little to win over the lords of the Vale, except for Lysa Arryn, whom he is now betrothed to marry. Tyrion's jaw nearly hit the table as Varys broke the news. How in the seven hells did the man manage to convince the woman to marry him? At least now he could take what he's seen in his bloody brothels and put it to use. While that's all well and good for him, Tyrion choked out. How does that help us? I sent the man there to get soldiers, not a fucking wife. Varys sighed. Lady Lysa has declared that Baelish will take over as Lord Protector of the Vale as soon as the two are married. The Spider explained. Such a position would put him in command of the forces of the Vale. Tyrion rubbed his jaw, annoyed that Baelish had been so successful. Then again, the fact that the Martells had agreed to a marriage with a girl who is half Lannister is still more unbelievable. Pycelle, send a message to Baelish. Tell him he has a week to marry the woman, and send the Knights of the Vale to my father's aid in the Riverlands. Tyrion ordered. Now what else must I know about? Margaery Tyrell and Robb Stark have finally married, Varys answered. The king in the north has also split up his army. Why would he do that? Cersei asked. Stark is being attacked on two fronts. Tyrion answered. He has no choice. How is he dividing his host? My little birds say that the men of the north and the Riverlands are heading north under the command of Jon Snow and Sir Brynden Tully, Varys explained. Lord Tarley is taking the majority of the Reachmen and is heading into the Westerlands to presumably finish what the Blackfish had started. Finally, the Northern King himself is taking the rest of the Reachmen and the Stormlords and is preparing to march towards Lord Tywin. Fool, Cersei snorted. He would have been better off sending Lord Tarley to face my father. Tyrion tapped the table thoughtfully. Perhaps it is a blessing in disguise, he suggested. Removed from men like Tarley and the Blackfish, Robb Stark is more vulnerable than he has ever been. This is the ideal time to cut the head off the snake. And with no younger brothers left behind to take up the mantle of King of the North, the resistance will falter and break apart, Cersei said, catching on. Tyrion nodded. It seems that once again, all of our hopes lay on my father's shoulders, he said. This war is entering the endgame. We will need to act and act fast to ensure that we are in a better position to end this war than the Stark boy is. Or else we will meet our ends. Line break. Tyrion looked down from the battlements as Bronn sparred with Pod. The rugged sellsword was practically chasing the poor boy around the yard, yet Pod did seem to be learning. There were moments where the sellsword looked genuinely impressed, before he attacked with even more ferocity. Your sellsword is quite handy with a blade, Varys commented as he strolled up to the little man. It's a shame the boy is less so. What is the benefit to watching my guard and the boy? Tyrion asked curiously. I would have thought that you would have your little chicks on much more interesting prey. You are a very interesting man, my lord Hand, Varys answered, and a very dangerous one at that. Tyrion scoffed. Scared of a dwarf? More so his brain, Varys replied easily. He looked out at the square where the two fighters were still training. I hear you have named a temporary master of laws. Tyrion nodded. Sir Jacelyn has done quite a magnificent job with the Watch. I figured I would put him on the council until this war is over. Ah, yes, the Iron Hand. A brave and honorable man. Too bad there is not more like him. Varys mused. I must say I am rather surprised with Littlefinger's success in the East. Then again there have been rumors about the man and Lysa Tully. Tyrion nodded. So you've informed me. Now the man has the might of the Vale in his hands. As much as I enjoy the Knight's Aid, I do not enjoy the man controlling them. Nor do I, Varys agreed. Tyrion sighed and shook his head, walking away from the square and towards where the battlements looked out over the Blackwater. Varys followed, his slippered feet barely making a sound. How is the Targaryen girl? Tyrion asked as they walked. After losing her Dothraki husband, the girl found herself back in the company of one Illyrio Mopatis, one of the magisters of Pentos. Varys answered, she has few allies and fewer still to come to her aid. Should she sail for Westeros? Tyrion glanced at the Master of Whispers, not sure to believe the man or not. It seems I will have to trust your judgment on the matter, he said carefully. Varys smiled softly. As always, my lord, I try to give you only the information I know. I do not presume to pass judgment. I leave that to men such as yourself, and his grace. Yes, my nephew does enjoy passing judgment, Tyrion muttered, particularly when it means someone dies because of it. Does his grace mean to step out onto the battlefield? Varys asked curiously. The minstrels would have their work cut out for them. Yes, the unbeatable young wolf, king of 4 kingdoms and leader of an army over 100,000 strong. The man who duped the mighty lion of Casterly Rock and captured the Kingslayer, Tyrion said, with mock enthusiasm. Versus the king on the Iron Throne, woman-beater and whore-murderer. The minstrels would not have much to work with, if the two fight. I heard the king has been training with his cousin and Sarah Merrin, Varys said. Tyrion scoffed. You've heard the king training. I've had the unfortunate honor of watching it. He hacks at a straw target while Lancel and Trant choke on his balls. Varys sighed, leaning against the battlements, as Tyrion looked out over the water. Well, there are reasons for men like Sandor Clegane, and his brother. The mountain will kill the other kings while the hound protects ours, such as he is. Varys, I assume you came to me for more than your comments about my squire and the king. Tyrion said finally, as much as I enjoy your ballless company, I would suggest you get to the point. Varys sighed again, folding his hands inside of his sleeves. Lord Tywin has gained quite a few allies in a remarkably short amount of time. So I've noticed, Tyrion grunted. Now get on with it. What will happen once Lord Tywin has won the war for the king? Varys asked. Tyrion shrugged. The Boltons and Freys will take over for when houses Stark and Tully go the path of the Tarbecks and Reynes, he explained. The Reach can be bought, and the Lords of the Stormlands will fall in behind Joffrey as King Robert's right heir. And what of Stannis' proclamation? Varys asked. Tyrion rolled his eyes. Once we have power again, most will forget Stannis' proclamation. If they don't, then we'll make examples of a few. They may not talk about it, but they will remember it, Varys said gravely. Tyrion scowled. That is a headache I prefer to leave to my father. I am rather preoccupied making sure my sister keeps her son in line and the city doesn't go all to hell. And doing a famously good job at it, Daenerys praised. I have seen nary a bruise on the young Sansa Stark nor tears from Prince Tommen. Yes, the king has some troubling tendencies, but again, that is a problem for my father. Who better to deal with our young king than the man who kept the realm together under the rule of the Mad King? Tyrion chuckled grimly. Varys bowed to Tyrion. I will take my leave. So many little birds returning to the next. Tyrion held up a hand to stop the man. Varyans, I do not need to remind you that, if you hide anything from us and it leads to the Starks besieging the city, I will make sure that this is a nest you cannot fly away from. Varys gave Tyrion a little smile and strode away, the little man's gaze burning a hole in the silk robe he wore. Jon 16th. The crossing was exactly as Jon remembered it, as was on his journey towards River Run. A twin set of keeps, squat, gray, and ugly, with a large stone bridge spanning across them, wide enough for 2 wagons to ride abreast. The keeps themselves were peppered with arrow slits, complete with a thick iron portcullis and a solid gate. There was no majesty or grace to the castles, not like Winterfell or River Run. The builders had worked with one intention in mind, to make the castles hard as hell to take. What made the crossings so formidable were the twin keeps themselves. Any attacking army would have to break into the first keep on one side of the river, and then cross the bridge and attack the second keep, while being exposed to arrow fire, rocks, burning oil, and whatever else the defenders could hurl at them. The easiest way to take the twins would be to assault both castles at the same time and spread out the defenders. Unfortunately, the only way that was possible would be to send part of the army south towards Harrenhal, where there was the only other bridge that crossed the Green Fork. It would take weeks for the other force to get into place. That was time and an option that was unavailable to the Northern and Riverlander force. To put it bluntly, the home of the Freys was just as annoying as the family that presided inside. Jon felt a small smile form on his lips as he remembered when he and Sam had crossed the bridge so many months ago. Flashback. House Frey isn't that old. Sam rambled happily as he and Jon passed through the Western Keep and continued on their path towards the home of House Tully. But it's quite amazing what they've been able to do. Jon frowned slightly. He had not dealt with Lord Frey himself, but his steward, a cane-wielding man named Lothar. He had overcharged Jon on the price to cross the bridge, but had also insulted him multiple times. Once it had been made known that Jon's last name was Snow. It had been a sour interaction for Jon, and after spending only a few moments in the man's company, Jon had wanted nothing more than to be back on the road and leave the twin castles far behind. I'm not you'd say that if you had met the steward, Jon huffed. Sam shrugged, still happily bliss. You shouldn't take it to heart, Jon. Lord Frey is known for his many children that are said to be constantly competing with each other. How would you feel if you were constantly arguing with your family? I'd feel like I was back at the wall, Jon muttered. Just without the cold. Sam laughed, bringing the conversation to an end and allowing Jon to brood in peace. The two rode on for the rest of the day and camped in the ruins of Oldstones, where Sam once again launched into a history lecture. King Christopher IV, Mud was said to be one of the greatest kings of all the first men, Sam said excitedly, walking around and looking at the ruins. He won 99 battles and lost only one when the 7 Andal kings banded against him. Whatever happened to House Mud? Jon asked, leaning against the log he had laid his saddlebags on. It made for a convenient pillow and backrest. Sam shook his head, taking his seat across from Jon close to the fire. The same as many other houses, I would guess. Time and war took its toll on the house till it was whittled down to nothing. Jon nodded slowly. My father always worried that the North was too weak, he said, his mind going to his father for some reason. I heard him talk about it with Maester Luwin. Apparently the numbers of some books don't match up. Sam looked confused. What does your father mean? The North helped form the backbone of Westeros when Robert Baratheon took the throne. Jon shrugged. I know, but I think my father believed that the North was weaker than it should have been. Wasn't the Company of the Rose formed after Torrhen Stark bent the knee to the Conqueror? Sam asked. It was, but I think that the company was formed from a small group of nobles who didn't want to live under Targaryen rule. I can't imagine many Northerners abandoning House Stark. Jon answered. So what will you do after the war? Sam asked, finally. Jon sighed and leaned back, crossing his arms. I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I've had so many paths open to me. Whatever it is, I want to help my brother." Jon looked at his large friend. "What about you?" Sam hesitated, his round face half illuminated by the flickering firelight. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I'm not used to making decisions for myself." "Your father," Jon said, already knowing the answer. Sam nodded. "I don't want to talk about it." Jon shook his head, grabbing a small twig from the pile of extra firewood and throwing it at the bigger lad. It was a common tactic Robb had used many times with Jon whenever something was on Jon's mind, and Robb wanted to help. "We've spoken about my relationship with Lady Stark," Jon said. "You would think for a woman who tried her best to make my life miserable, I don't hate her." "You're a good person," Sam explained. Jon shrugged. "That's not for me to say, but I realized after I tried to run away and spent a long night in the Wolf's Wood, that, while there is one person who hates me, there are many more that love me. That's why I can talk about Lady Stark without feeling her sting." Sam frowned. "You didn't grow up with my father." "Did you grow up alone?" Jon challenged. "What about your mother, your sisters, or your brother? Perhaps you have been so focused on the abuse you received from your father that you forgot those who actually loved you." Sam didn't speak for a long time, not even looking at Jon. Jon waited patiently as Sam thought over what had been said. Jon knew he was right. Sam needed to get over the fear he had for his father and the sad memories that still tormented him. He couldn't run from it forever. "Jon," Sam said quietly, still not looking at Jon. "Yes? Thank you." "Flashback." "Jin Lord Frey has sent his response," Eddard Stark said, breaking Jon from his thoughts. The bastard of Winterfell nodded and strode back towards the command tent, Ghost at his heels. He had stepped outside to wait while the Blackfish's messenger had given Walder Frey terms of surrender. Now it was time to see what the old lord had to say. "My lord father has rejected your terms." The chubby man bearing Frey colors sneered. The Frey messenger was finely dressed, with dark ringlets and a pointed beard. He leaned heavily on his cane. "Walder Frey is no longer a lord of the Riverlands," Edmure growled. "He lost that privilege when he turned his back on King Robb." Lamlothar, the steward of the twins, named after his twisted leg, shrugged, glaring at the assembled lords from his place at the other end of the table. Obviously the man knew that he would not be touched, not while under a banner of peace that he had smartly brought with him. "House Frey is recognized by King Joffrey as Lord Paramounts of the Riverlands, a title we claim through our relation to yourself, Edmure, and your marriage to my sister Roslyn," Lothar said smugly. The Lord of Riverrun gripped the hilt of his blade, looking like he wanted to run the cripple through there and then, but Patrick and Jason Mallister moved a little closer to the man, discreetly putting hands on his arms to hold him back. "I told your father to stand down and surrender his castle." He said no. Scepter Brendan said gruffly, "He has forfeited his right to any sort of courtesy offered to enemies of the king in the north." Lothar scoffed. "Courtesy? That's a fine way of saying freeze your balls off at the wall, Blackfish." The old knight growled, gripping the edge of the table. "Get the hell out of here, and tell your father that I will drag him from his bloody table and see him executed for treason. It is only a matter of time." Lothar sneered. "The crossing has never been taken. Keep that in mind. Attack us at your own risk. Fishes should learn to stay in the water." "You're not only dealing with Tullys," Jon commented, stepping forward with Ghost at his side, the giant wolf baring his teeth at the steward. The sight of the massive beast caused the man to go deathly pale with fright. Unable to keep up his cocky composure, he hurriedly took a few steps back, stumbling over his bad leg. The others in the room chuckled darkly at the man's fear. "I remember you," Lothar spat, trying to regain control of himself. "The bastard!" Jon shrugged. "I know you as well," he answered. "The traitor." Once again the table laughed. Even the Blackfish smiled grimly as Jon faced down the Frey man. Out of all the Freys, Lamlothar was just as black-hearted as his father. He was cocky and arrogant, and the old knight was enjoying the sight of the man stumbling over his words, constantly glancing towards the massive direwolf at Jon's side. Sending one more glare towards Edmure, Jon and Brynden Lothar stalked out of the room, unable to respond to Jon's claim. When he was out of the room, Edmure slammed his fists on the table. "Damn and blast that fucking family," he growled. "My father should have stripped them of lands and titles long ago." "Better late than never," Lord Mallister agreed grimly. Walder Frey is bold, and has good reason to be. The twins will be very hard to take, and we don't have the men to spare on a quick and bloody attack. We have nearly 30,000 men, Eddard Stark countered. We must do our best to preserve our men, lad, Albert Glover advised. The Riverlanders must return to King Robb, and the Northern Lords will need all the sword arms we can get once we return home. Roderick Reswell and his idiot daughter kept their men back when his grace first went south. Now, all their troops are bearing down on Eagle's Roost, Lord Hawker explained grimly. While Robb and Jon had learned of the events at Winterfell, Roland Hawker had received bad news himself. His brother Bolton had sent one last message to his brother, telling him of how he had returned to Eagle's Roost to protect their ancestral home against the advancing might of the Ryswells and Dustons. Now, without the Western fleet to protect the northern coastline, the Ironborn were free to pillage and rape at their heart's desire. Jon crossed his arms, looking over the map of the area as the conversation continued. Something was getting at him, a memory that he was trying to recall that had something to do with the twins. Sir Brynden, have your men scout down here, Jon said suddenly, pointing to a spot a mile south of the castle. The old knight frowned as the conversation came to a stop. There's nothing there, lad, he said. Just the river. Jon shook his head. There isn't. I traveled with Tyrion Lannister when I went to the Wall. He said that there was a small grove of trees on either bank that hides a ford where horses could cross, he explained. He used it to bypass the twins when meeting with King Robert's party on their way to Winterfell. Brudden's expression hardened. How does the imp know this? He asked, his tone dangerously annoyed. Jon glanced at Edmure, who had suddenly gone red. He had heard it from a drunk Riverlander during a feast. Jon said vaguely, trying to save the other man from what was about to happen. Like hell he did. Edmure told him, Brynden growled, turning on his nephew. Damn and blast it, man. Why is that so bad? Eddard Stark asked, mystified at the knight's anger. The Blackfish huffed. The ford is a secret known only to the Tullys. It's how I was able to get into the Riverlands so fast when the Kingslayer attacked River Run. Now apparently, Tyrion Lannister knows of it, and now so does everyone. All because my nephew got fucking drunk. Jon looked between the two men before continuing with his point. Nevertheless, we can use it to our advantage. Walder Frey expects us to attack one keep, then march across and attack the other. Of course he would expect that, the Greatson grunted. That's all we can bloody do. Jon shook his head. If we brought some of our cavalry across the ford and attacked the other keep at the same time, we might be able to breach and take Frey hostage. Brynden nodded, instantly catching on. We'll have the men bring grapples and lots of rope. We'll tear down the portcullis and the gate. You'll be shot full of arrows. It won't work, Lord Stark said gruffly, crossing his arms. Not if we commit all our men to the attack here, Jon said, gesturing out the tent towards the nearest keep. Eddard pointed it out already. We have more men. Whoever is commanding the defense will have to put most of his defenders in the western keep, if he is not already. By the time we're in on the other side, there will be nothing they can do. Try to charge across the bridge and be slaughtered, or stay holed up in their keep and wait to be killed while the doors below are broken open. That last part had been the clincher for many in the room. The idea was daring, especially since the group of cavalry would have no siege weapons, but ropes and grapples would work just fine as a substitute. I'll make sure the men bring extra horses to help bring down the gates, Brynden said. Lord Hawker, you will command the attack in 2 days' time, as close to dusk as you can. Do not be stupid, but commit as many men as you can without too much loss of life. The Lord of Eagle's Roost nodded firmly. We'll build a few fake rams, give the bastards hope when one breaks. When you're in position, we will begin the real attack. Speaking of which, how will we know that you're attacking the other gate? Eddard Stark asked. My Boean will go with you, Lord Hawker answered. He will shoot a signal arrow when the gate is down. A sound plan, my lord, Brynden said. Lord Glover, Lady Mormont, you will come with Jon and I. We will seek out Walder Frey and deal with him while you two lead the others and secure the keep. Lord Hawker, when we are through and you begin your actual assault, secure the keep first, and wait till I send word that the attack was a success. The muscular northern lord nodded. It will be done, he promised. Right, we have work to do, Brynden said, concluding the meeting. In 2 days' time, we take the twins. Rose II. Returning to the Dreadfort had been advantageous for Roose and his plans for taking over the north. With Moat Cailin fortified with 2,000 Frey soldiers, it allowed the new Warden of the North to consolidate his newly given power, along with knowing who is and is not his allies in the North. First to pledge their loyalty to Rose had been Lud Whitehill, the fat and brainless Lord of High Point. If him having trouble getting down on a knee hadn't been so pathetic, it would have been laughable. Now he and his cruel son traveled through the eastern half of the North, scaring others into joining the Bolton cause. There were not many things that the fat man could do, but he was adequate when it came to bashing heads together. When Rose had returned to the North, he had been surprised to find more allies waiting for him. All thanks to the bastard. The boy had turned Arnulf Karstark and Roderick Reswell to their cause, adding another 5,000 men to Rose's force. Each man had an axe to grind with Stark, and they had jumped at the chance to get their revenge. Now Rose's new generals had been spread out across the North, wiping out the rest of the Stark loyalists. First among them was Eagle's Roost, where Boden Hawker had returned from the waves to protect his home. Roderick Reswell, along with the bulk of the Reswell-Dustin force, had marched west to ensure that the port city was destroyed, eliminating a potentially large thorn in Rose's side. The Hawker brothers, Boden and Roland, were annoyingly good at war, and extremely loyal to the Starks of Winterfell. The sooner Boden Hawker and his home were destroyed, the better. Ramsay, having returned from burning Winterfell to the ground, now led a host of cavalry south, capturing Hornwood, adding yet more men to the cause, and harassing Manderley lands. The fat fools of White Harbor still controlled a strong force of men, and like the Hawkers, were loyal to Robb Stark. Rose hoped that, by putting farms and villages to the sword, Wyman would be pressured to join Rose to protect his people. Finally, Arnulf Karstark, his small host strengthened by the remaining Frey soldiers, were marching north towards Last Hearth. The Grachan's uncles, Morse and Hodder, could potentially become allies, but it was unlikely. They were not ambitious men, their joint rule of stewardship proving that, but they were not Chanumber and could turn out to be like Arnulf, men jumping at the chance for more power. Roost took a sip of watered wine as he looked out over the map of the North, moving pieces around as his forces moved into position. The Ironborn still ravaged the western shore, Deepwood Motta and Torrens Square still under their control. Roost made a mental note to deal with them when his position was more secure. But for now they served his purpose of being a thorn in the mind of Robb Stark. "My lord," Steelshanks Walton said, bowing before entering the room. Walton, called Steelshanks because of the way he armored his legs, was one of Rose's most capable men. He was a brutal and effective killer, though not cruel. Something that Rose found disappointing. Walton, like many of the men under Rose's command, was dour and near emotionless. "What?" Rose asked, his tone giving away the fact that Walton had his attention for a few moments and to not mince words. "Word from Blackwalder," Walton reported, handing a scroll to his lord. "The crossing has been besieged." Rose frowned. Blackwalder, one of Walder Frey's great-grandchildren, was known to be a stern and temperamental man. He had been put in charge of the Frey host after Steffruan Frey had been disposed of. Rose had left the man in charge of the defense of Moat Cailin. "Northerners?" he asked. "Riverlanders too." The captain added, "Doesn't look like the Stark boy is leading them." "Course he isn't," Rose snapped impatiently. "If the lords of the Riverlands are there, then so is the Blackfish." Rose looked over the message, which was just a mess of pleas to send men south to reinforce their home. The Lord of the Dreadfort scowled and tossed the message into the brazier in the corner. "Damn fools," he muttered. "Don't they know that the twins can't be taken? Not without massive loss." "My lord?" Walton said curiously. Roose waved aside his question. "Forget it," he said. "What else do you have to report?" "Lord Reswell has set up camp around Eagle's Roost, but Hawker and his men have hunkered down within Eagle's Roost. Manderley has not replied to any of our messengers, and Karstark is a day away from Last Hearth." Walton said. "What about the mountain clans?" Rose asked. Walton grimaced and shook his head. "The messenger's horse returned with the man's head in the saddlebag," he replied. Rose shook his head. "Bloody savages," he muttered. Trying to find allies amongst the clansmen had been a long shot for Rose. The fur-clad barbarians had always been deathly loyal to House Stark for reasons that Rose did not understand. "Should I assemble the men?" Walton asked. Roose shook his head. "Don't bother. The mountain clansmen stayed in their holes when Robb Stark went south. We'll deal with them later." Walton nodded. Yes, my lord, he answered. How are the prisoners? Lady Stark has been confined to barren chambers. Per your orders, and the Greyjoy boy has been taken to the dungeons, Walton replied easily. Roose allowed a ghost of a smile to appear on his lips. Ramsay's capture of the Lady of Winterfell, Theon Greyjoy, had been an extreme stroke of luck. That, along with killing off the other 2 Stark boys in the burning of Winterfell, had left Roose with a lot of leverage against Robb Stark and his allies. Roose knew that the boy king would never risk the life of his mother, and would give in to what Roose wanted, so long as he kept the woman in his grasp. Is that all? Roose asked. Walton nodded. Yes, my lord. Then why are you still here? Walton bowed and left. Roose had always been short and crisp with his subordinates, mentally abusing them even. Many did not last long in the Dreadfort, but those that did had learned to simply take Rose's clipped tone with a grain of salt. Roose watched him go for a moment before switching his gaze back to the map. Everything was going to plan. By the time the crossing was taken, if it was ever taken, he would have the north under his control and would have time to solidify his position. That, along with Captain Stark as his prisoner, meant that Roose would have the leverage to gain a lot of power and influence that had been denied his family for so long. Yes, House Bolton's knives were sharp, and Robb Stark would learn just how sharp they can be if he decided to try and free his mother. Bowden Hawker. The captain of the Seahawk marched down the battlements, his cutlass and axe held ready in his hands as raiders swarmed over the walls, engaging with the leather and steel-clad men of Eagle's Roost. Bowden Hawker cut a bloody swathe through the invaders as bowmen filled in behind him, firing at the enemy as they tried to get on the walls. The man wasn't a fool. He knew that this wasn't the might of the traitorous force under Lord Ryswell's command. He was testing the defenses, and Bowden was going to show him that it would take more than 5,000 other traitors to take Eagle's Roost. Push them back, Bowden bellowed, cutting down one man with his cutlass while he buried his throwing axe in the head of another. They will not take your homes today. The men responded to their lord's voice, fighting with renewed ferocity. They were sea-going men and fought like devils, hurling abuse as their cutlasses and sea-axes went to work. The men of Barrowtown and the Rills tried to match the vigor of their opponents, but it was no use. They were being slaughtered. Soon a horn came from the enemy camp, and the raiders took their chance to fall back. The men of Eagle's Roost jeered as their enemy retreated, their fists and boots seeing the enemy off. "My lord, they're retreating." A nearby captain said happily, "Keep the archers firing," Bowden barked. "They'll be firing at the backs of the enemy," the man questioned. "They are traitors. I care not how they die," Bowden said dismissively. "Keep the archers firing." The captain obeyed his order, and soon the bases of the ladders, brought by the raiders, were littered with men, their bodies sundered by arrow shafts. It was not a good way to die, especially since many of them were retreating. Bowden remained on the battlements, watching as the last of the raiders made it back to the safety of their encampment. He knew what shooting men in the back did to commanders. He wanted to send a message, and now all he had to do was wait for a reply. "Hawker!" Roderick Ryswell cried, riding towards the walls, remaining out of the range of Bowden's archers. "Stand down," Bowden said calmly. "Approach Ryswell. I won't let my archers kill you." "How can I trust your word?" Ryswell challenged. "Because I won't allow them to take the pleasure of killing from myself," Bowden snapped. Ryswell glared at the captain, but approached nonetheless, his eyes glancing constantly from the broad-shouldered warrior to the archers around him. He was a broad, stout man with long, curly brown hair and a bushy beard. His eyes burned like wildfire with fury as he looked at the defenders of Eagle's Roost. Like most northern warriors, he was dressed in steel and plated leather, a black tabard with a gold stallion head over his armor. "I never thought I'd see the day when a hawker gives up his honor." Ryswell spat. "Dishonoring my men by shooting them in the back is a low not even I would reach." Bowden shrugged, stepping up onto the battlements so that his entire body was exposed. He crossed his arms across his muscular chest, his bloody cutlass still clearly seen. Bowden had no fear of falling, nor of being shot. He had lived most of his life at sea, and had braved many sea storms. He had accepted long ago the certainty of death. Dishonoring men who have already dishonored themselves. Bowden scowled. "You've always been a fool, Roderick." "Watch your tone," Ryswell warned. "I will not hesitate to put every man, woman, and child in the city to the sword." Bowden scoffed. Your little raiding party barely lasted an hour against my sentries. You'll never make it past the main wall. There is still time to surrender. Ryswell tried, but Bolton didn't let him continue. Save it for your love letters to Bolton, he spat. I will give you a chance to turn your army of traitors around and head home. Refuse and watch as my men and I color the walls red. The defenders on the wall cheered on their lord. They shared his confidence. They had high walls, plenty of food, and the ranks of the guards had already swelled, as men from bakers to fishermen had joined the ranks of the city watch. Bowden had not called upon them yet, but they were trained daily for a couple of hours at first light before being released to go about their usual business. Of course, Roderick Ryswell had no idea that there were a few hundred more men inside the city training. It was a surprise that Bowden wanted to launch at the right moment. Is your pride worth all this? Ryswell challenged. Bowden shrugged. If you're asking where my pride is, you might want to look for your honor as well. You seem to have left it somewhere. My honor is well intact. Like the blazes it is. Bowden snapped. Any man who betrays his lawful king and liege lord has no honor, and has no right to call himself a lord of the realm. Robb Stark is nuts. I was there when you bent the knee to Eddard Stark. Bowden's voice boomed like thunder, even scaring the horse. Ryswell rode. I heard the words you said. You are an oathbreaker, Roderick Ryswell. You and your fucking daughter. You will both die a traitor's death, and I promise you this on my honor as captain of the Seahawk and as a hawker of Eagle's Roost, that I will see you pay for your treachery. Roderick growled and turned his horse to gallop away. Hundreds will die for your pride, he called as he rode away. And thousands will die for yours. Bowden shouted after him. Tywin II. Lord Riker was much how Tyrion had described, tall, well-muscled, with a confident stride of a man who knew his business. He was a capable man, of that there was no doubt. He was the kind of man Tywin would entrust to defend a castle or lead a part of the army during battle. But he had his limits, as most men did, and Tywin was well aware of those as well. He was not a thinker nor a strategist of any real skill. He could be told what to do, and he would do it, but he would never be able to see the full picture, unlike Tywin himself. Sitting across from the Lord of Duskendale was a man that Tywin found extremely deadly, with the arrogance to match. The Red Viper of Dorne lived up to his reputations. As soon as he swaggered through the door, plopped himself into a seat, propped his feet up on the table, and poured himself a goblet of wine, all at the same time. He was a lithe, slender man, with dark, tanned skin and lustrous black hair. He was a handsome man, with a roguish look that came from his sharp nose and dark eyes. A smirk played on the edges of his lips. Tywin saw intelligence in his eyes, though it was hidden behind the man's extreme confidence and swagger. My Lord Lannister, Oberyn Martell drawled casually, taking a drink of his wine. It has been a long while. When we had last met, I was but a boy. Indeed, Tywin said, crisply, glancing at the prince's boots before looking back at the man himself. I understand you brought 10,000 men with you. The Prince of Dorne shrugged. Had to move fast, and nothing moves faster than a Dornish stallion. Lord Euronwood is assembling the rest of the Dornish host in Dorne, near Sunspear. So it would seem, Tywin replied in the same slightly annoyed tone. My son says that he intends to sail his army into the Crownlands. Oberyn nodded. And avoid the Stormlands. It was my brother's idea, he explained. Why waste time and energy marching through rain and mud, when the men can enjoy a week of pleasant weather and wind, conserving their strength? I was unaware that Dorne had a fleet, Lord Riker commented. Oberyn gave the man a sly smile. Perhaps not that of the Lancers, nor the royal fleet. But we have many merchant ships that had luckily been in the harbor for my brother to command. When will Lord Euronwood arrive? Tywin asked, bringing the conversation back on topic. Oberyn shrugged. 20,000 men is a lot to load, Lord Lannister, he replied lazily, taking another drink of wine. A week, maybe more. Another few days to march here. Tywin glared at the prince, a look usually enough to wither any man. But Oberyn simply smiled back. The Red Viper and the Great Lion were by no means friends. Simply allies pushed together in war. The Dornishman's tone was already grating on Tywin's nerves, but he needed the men and the cavalry he commanded. Lord Wrecker, you have brought your full host, yes? Tywin asked, changing the subject. The Lord of Duskendale nodded. Yes, my lord. 15,000 men, fresh and fit, he responded firmly. Oberyn chuckled as he drank when Riker said, "Fresh and fit," but did not say anything other than that. "Good, make sure they are ready for battle," Tywin ordered, ignoring the other man. "They are about to face the might of the Stormlands, and there are no better levies than those." Tywin was backed by an army of battle-hardened men, many of whom had fought under the Great Lion during the Greyjoy Rebellion, and at the sacking of King's Landing. But the Lord of Casterly Rock was a realist and knew his history as well. He knew of how the Stormlander host had carved through the Loyalist host at the Battle of the Trident so that Robert Baratheon could face Rhaegar. They were hardy, rugged men who lived in harsh conditions in the Stormlands. They would be a worthy opponent to Tywin's army. Oberyn raised an eyebrow. "What plan do you have in mind for dealing with the young wolf?" Tywin folded his hands behind his back, standing behind his chair. "Robb Stark marches south with the might of the Stormlands and a strong force of Reachmen, but he is without his best men. Caerleon is in the Westerlands and the Blackfish has gone north to the Twins. The boy is alone, and I intend to crush him while he is." Oberyn took another drink of wine, cradling the goblet in his hand. "Good speech, but that did not answer my question," he said. "What is your plan, my lord?" Tywin raised an eyebrow, gazing at the prince. The message was clear. Oberyn would not speak to him in that tone, not in private, and certainly not in front of another. Tywin was the commander of the army, and that now included Oberyn's men as well. He would be respected by the Red Viper, or there would be hell to pay. "We will wait, and let the boy come to us," Tywin answered finally. "Within the walls of Harrenhal?" Lord Wrecker asked. Tywin shook his head. "No, on the lake's edge," he explained, walking over to the window to look out over the ruins, the sunlight glinting off of the lake in the distance. "We must make ourselves look like a target worth attacking immediately. Goad the glory-seeking young wolf into striking without thinking. Then, when he has thrown all his troops into the fight, Prince Oberyn and his cavalry shall arrive and sweep the boy and his army into the God's Eye." "How do you plan to make the boy attack you head-on?" Oberyn asked. "What's to stop him from simply forcing you into the river himself?" Tywin turned around, his eyes meeting those of the Red Viper. "My host will assemble some distance from the lake, giving the boy the belief that I do not want to be forced into the river. He will attack me head-on, strengthening his left flank in order to turn my own and force me into the river," he explained, the battle playing out in the older man's head as he spoke. "My force will draw back towards the river, not retreating, but luring the boy and his army closer to the lake shore. At the sound of 3 horn blasts, the Dornish will arrive and drive the weary and unprepared Reachmen and Stormlanders into the water." Tywin stepped towards the 2 men, both silent as Tywin explained his plan. Neither had fought with him, but many of his commanders would say that what Tywin was explaining was likely to happen during the actual battle. His mind was amazing, even at his advanced age. He was able to play out an entire battle from start to finish, and had the confidence to know that he would always end up victorious. "Always, the Stark boy and his army will be routed and destroyed," Tywin went on. "Caerleon and his host of Reachmen will return to their fields in the south, while their fat overlord pledges fealty to my grandson. The Stormlords, those that remain, will soon follow suit as they realize the northern cause is lost." "And the lords of the Riverlands in the north?" Lord Riker asked. "The lords of the Riverlands shall be taken care of swiftly and harshly. Lands removed, titles taken, and the Freys shall take over as Lord Paramounts, just as King Joffrey had declared," Tywin answered. "As for the north, Lord Bolton should have that well in hand, especially since Winterfell has been burned to the ground. Currently, the northern force is besieging the Twins. A folly if there ever was one. When we are done with the young wolf, we will deal with his allies in one sweep. The northern lords will return to the north, beaten and bruised, and will swear their fealty to the new Lord Paramount of the North." Oberyn drained the rest of his wine. "Your reputation is well deserved, my Lord Lannister," he praised casually. "I have a good feeling that Dorne has chosen the right side of this fight." "Lannisters pay their debts," Prince Oberyn, Tywin answered simply. "Lannisters always pay their debts." Prince Oberyn. The Dornishman found his 2 men at the top of the highest tower, glaring daggers at each other. Both men were knights, dressed in bronze-scale armor and plate armor, with long swords at their sides. One man had shoulder-length silver hair divided with a streak of midnight. He was clean-shaven, with an aquiline nose and a strong jaw. His most prominent feature was his purplish eyes. The second man had light sandy brown hair, sky-blue eyes, and a close-cropped beard. Both men were tall and handsome, with physiques that proved their warrior status. They bowed when Oberyn entered the room, closing the door quietly behind him. "How was the meeting with the lion, my prince?" the brown-haired man asked respectfully. "Dreadfully boring," Oberyn sighed, rolling his eyes. "He will have us ambush the Stark boy during the battle. Sweep their men into the battle. That'll wipe out the boy's host," the silver and black-haired man growled. "We're supposed to ensure that the war keeps going." Oberyn raised an eyebrow, glaring at the man. Gerald Dane was an annoying man to work with. Prideful, quick to anger, and cruel. The man was also extremely skilled with a blade and was quite loyal to Oberyn's niece. The Red Viper much preferred the other man. Daemon Sand had squired for Oberyn when he had been but a boy, and had earned his knightship as a reward for many years of good service. He was quietly intelligent, deftly loyal to the Martell family, and is one of the premier knights in all of Dorne. "Do not forget that Stark has plenty of hosts still out in the field," Oberyn answered. "Tyrion seems to think that the lords of the Reach and Stormlands will abandon the boy should he lose a battle. I think differently. Tywin will need to fight 2 more battles before the war is over," Daemon said, catching on to what his old mentor was saying. "Possibly more than 2. Tarly and the Blackfish won't be easy to fight." Oberyn agreed. "More than enough time for our friends to take the city." "Have they reached the island yet?" the man known as Darkstar grumbled. Daemon shook his head. "We would have received a messenger from the company if they had." Darkstar slammed his hand against the wall. "So we fight for the Lannister. Waste more Dornish lives for a man who slaughtered one of our own doing. The Fat King's rebellion." That had been a question many had wondered when Oberyn's brother had called the banners. "Why are we fighting for the Lannisters?" In a closed-door discussion involving many of the strongest lords in Dorne, Doran and Oberyn had explained their plan that had been more than 20 years in the making, with only one goal in mind: to bring House Lannister to its knees, and to drown the Golden Lions in blood. "You know as well as I why we're doing this," Daemon said calmly. "We need to weaken both Starks and Lannisters. The longer this fight goes on, the more the common folk will be looking for someone to end it. The Queen and King can do that. But not with the forces we have now," Oberyn continued. "Stark still has 100,000 men spread out across Westeros. The less he has, the better." The Red Viper turned his attention to his old squire. "Have you spoken with our other allies?" Daemon and others had been on the road for much longer than others had known, traveling to certain castles all across the Riverlands, Stormlands, and the Reach. Houses that had once been favored by the true rulers of Westeros. The young knight shook his head. "I have, but it yielded little fruit. They are scared to rise against Stark." "Have they not heard what our queen possesses?" Geralt growled. Aiden shrugged. "They have, but it did little." Oberyn crossed his arms. "What's done is done. We must only rely on those loyal to the king and queen." "What of the raiders at Driftmark?" Geralt asked. "We'll leave them for the Lannisters to deal with," Oberyn answered. "The more they have to deal with, the less likely they will see the true threat."
Harold I.
"My lady, please. All we ask," Lord Royce pleaded, standing before the gnarled wood throne of the Eyrie, where Lady Lysa Arryn, the Lady of the Vale, sat holding court. The old Lord of Runstone had been coming before the woman every day for the past few weeks, ever since the Reach and Stormlands had declared for the Starks, asking for her to declare for her sister's son as well. Lord Royce had been close to convincing her to do so. Then Pettier Baelish had arrived and Lady Lysa had returned to her former stance of remaining neutral, much to the dismay of Royce and his allies in the Vale, who wished to join the war that was now known as the War of Three Kings, those being Robb Stark, Joffrey Baratheon, and Balon Greyjoy. "My answer is no, my lord," Lady Lysa replied sternly, rocking her son gently in her embrace. Harold frowned. He still had trouble believing that he was related to Lord Robert, or Sweet Robin, as his mother called him. The boy was small and painfully thin, with thin, spindly limbs. Harold himself was more than a decade older than the boy, but even when he was his age, he was a ball of energy that made the Septa, who watched after him, want to pull her hair out. Robert looked like he was constantly ready for a nap. The differing looks were also quite strange. Robert had brown hair, with large dark eyes, the opposite of Harold's sandy blonde hair and clear blue eyes. Perhaps it was the Tully in him, but even then they were known to have auburn hair and blue eyes. It was most curious. Lord Royce, my betrothed and I appreciate your honorable intention, Baelish said sweetly, placing a hand on Lysa's shoulder. But as a Lord of the Vale, you should know that your first priority is the safety and protection of Lord Robert. Lord Royce frowned. Lord Robert would be perfectly safe here in the Eyrie, he argued. Baelish arched an eyebrow. Would he? He challenged. The Lannisters once again have a fleet. What's to stop them from landing troops here in the Vale and attacking our lord, while the men who are supposed to defend him are away in the Riverlands? All eyes turned to Lord Royce, who was clenching his massive hand at his side. Harold had quickly learned that Baelish had a way with words that could turn a room against any man. He had seen it done many times against criminals who were pleading their case to the Lady of the Vale. The Lannisters have no men, Lord Redfort said, taking up the challenge. The Westerlands have been ravished by the Northmen, and every other Lannister host has been destroyed. All Lord Tywin has is his own host, against the might of 4 kingdoms. Baelish wagged his finger, stepping down from behind the throne, and walking down the steps towards the 2 men, talking all the while. That is where you are wrong, my friends, he said with mock sadness. You see, Lord Lancaster has not been idle. The Martells have joined their side, as has House Bolton and House Frey. Turn cloaks, Lord Hunter growled. Baelish tutted. This is war, my lords, an alliance shift like the wind, he explained. The Lannisters are now poised to win this war. Robb Stark marches on Tywin Lannister without the counsel of his best strategist. His home had been taken by Boltons and Ironborn. Even Winterfell has been burned to the ground. Baelish stopped in front of Lord Royce, the older lord towering over the slightly built lord from the Fingers. Yet Baelish's slight smirk never left his face. Now, my lord, he continued, in a quieter tone. Does that sound like a king we should ally ourselves to? One that has his men turn on him, his home taken and torched, and makes simple mistakes that not even a child would make. Lady Anya Waynewood, the last of Lord Royce's allies, stepped forward now. He is still a Stark, and that makes him better than Balon or Joffrey, she argued, firmly. We all know how mad Balon Greyjoy is, and the boy in King's Landing kills babes. Baelish shook his head, turning his gaze on the Lady of Ironoaks. Not his order, my lady, he said. That was done by the former commander of the Gold Cloaks, Saranjana Slaint, in an effort to gain favor with King Joffrey. The man has been sent to the wall for his crimes. Royce crossed his arms. You expect us to believe that the commander of the City Watch had the authority to send gold cloaks into the Vale? He asked. Baelish smiled thinly. It seems he did, he answered simply. Royce shook his head disgustedly, turning to face Lady Lysa, who had turned her attention to her son, allowing him to nurse in front of everyone. Harold cringed. His cousin should have stopped nursing years ago. Why his mother, and others for that matter, allowed it to happen made little sense to the young warrior. There was a theory floating around the Eyrie that Robert's nursing was what was causing his weakness and shaking fits. Harold was no maester, but the rumor worriedly made sense. My lady, Royce rumbled. At least allow me to take some cavalry, he asked. Lord Eddard was a friend to each and every one of us. He grew up in this very hall. His death must be avenged. Lady Lysa went red in the face, setting her son aside and fixing her dress as she stood slowly, glaring at the large lord of Runstone. No one will leave the Vale, she hissed. That is my order. Any who break it shall be thrown through the moon door. All eyes were immediately drawn to the giant circular door in the middle of the room that, when opened, gave a clear view of the mountainside hundreds of feet below. The ancient lords of the Vale, after the Andal invasion, hadn't seemed to be fans of executions. Unlike their northern peers, the moon door was their more sophisticated answer. Lord Royce glanced behind him. Redfort, Hunter, and Lady Waynewood were all retreating back, leaving the older lord alone to face the wrath of the Lady of the Vale. They all shared the belief that the Vale should join the war in favor of the Starks, but they were still faithful nobles of the Vale, loyal to House Arryn. In this case, Lady Lysa. None wanted to incur her rage. I'm afraid that I cannot accept that, my lady, Harold said suddenly, walking forward to stand beside his longtime friend and mentor. Years ago, the Vale rose up against a king who unjustly killed honorable men. We must do so again. You compare King Joffrey to the Man-King, Baelish said, almost sounding amused, as if there was a secret joke there. Harold's face hardened. I will never kneel to a king who allows men to kill babes or kill a lord of the realm without trial, he answered. Lysa looked ready to explode. You dare, she hissed. Yes, I dare. Harold snapped, cutting her off. House Stark is a friend of the Vale. Where is the honor in turning our backs when our friends call for our aid? When our family calls for aid? That last statement had stung more than the others for Lady Lysa, and everyone in the room knew it. It was no secret that both Robb Stark and his mother, Lysa's sister, had sent letters asking for aid, all of which the Lady of the Vale had denied. Guards, Lysa screamed violently, pointing a bony finger at the blonde youth. Arrest him! Royce drew his sword, as did Harold. You will do no such thing, my lady, he rumbled dangerously. Saralyn Corbry strode forward as steel-clad guards marched forward, hands on swords as they regarded the two men. The heir to Heartsholme sneered at the Lord of Runstone, who regarded the other man like one would when they find shit on the bottom of their boots. Let's put those swords down, gentlemen, Lynn ordered, half drawing his own blade, the famed Valyrian steel sword Lady Forlorn. More sounds of swords being drawn filled the air as others came to Royce's side. Lord Redford and his sons, Lord Hunter and his brothers Eustace and Harlan, Sir Morton, Lady Anya's son, and his brothers. Soon 2 men had become almost a dozen. I don't think we will, Lord Royce answered finally. My lady, we march to King Robb's aid, without your blessing. Lady Lysa seemed to have taken leave of her senses as she screamed and ranted for the group of men in front of her to be killed. Weirdly, Baelish and the swordsman who had been his shadow seemed to have disappeared. Kill them! Lysa shouted madly. Kill them all! Robert covered his ears, tears springing in his eyes as he watched his mother pace in front of the throne. Make it stop! Make it stop! He wailed as the maester came to his side, trying to comfort the boy. Blood does not have to be drawn here, my lady, Royce shouted over the noise in the room. Let there be peace. But Lady Lysa was beyond reason. No, you will not disobey me. I am the Lady of the Vale. For Saralyn seemed to be finished, with talking as well. He launched himself at Lord Royce, his sword sweeping down in a murderous arc, but the blade never landed as the man wielding it was thrown aside. Sarah Lucas, Lynn's youngest brother, had leapt from the safety of the crowd into the middle of the two groups, tackling his brother, the two rolling on the ground, struggling. One of the knights loyal to Lysa roared and charged forward, his comrades following him. At them, Royce bellowed, his broadsword cutting down the first man who came against the large lord. The battle was short and bloody, with Lady Lysa's being cut down or injured. They were not bad fighters, but against seasoned warriors like Royce, Redford, Sir Morton, and others, they stood no chance. Harold himself, the greenest of the group, had accounted for 2 of the bodies that now littered the ground. Lord Royce stepped forward, his blade dripping scarlet. There was a dangerous look in the man's eyes, one that Harold had only seen a few times, and only when a dangerous criminal had been brought before him. For how old Ewan Royce was, he was still a very dangerous man. Must this go further? He asked, looking up at Lysa. Lysa looked down at the bodies in shock, her face pale and drawn. No, she whispered. No, 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 no. With quickness that belied her frail figure, Lysa lunged towards her son and swept him up into her arms, clutching him close to her. The maester tried to calm her down as well, but she pushed the older man away. You cannot do this, she screamed insanely. You cannot. You will not. The woman was moving down the stairs towards the group, all of whom were watching her carefully. The woman seemed to have fully taken leave of her senses, and was now spouting nonsense. You have no idea what I have done, she continued to wail, continually shuffling out of the way of others, still gripping her son close to her chest. I did everything he asked, everything so that he could finally be mine. You will not take him away from me. Be careful, woman, Lord Redford shouted. Lady Lysa was now dangerously close to the moon door, which had accidentally been opened during the battle, when an errand guardsman had reeled back and slammed into the lever. But Lysa was gone. No, she screamed. I did everything he asked. He was going to be mine. I even killed that horrible old man. Royce stepped forward. What are you saying? He asked. Lysa shook her head. No, 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 she ranted, her heels no on the edge of the door, the updraft from the door fluttering her dress. You will not take him from me. As 5 men ran forward to try and catch the woman and her child, Lady Lysa was quicker than them all. She stepped back, losing her balance, and fell, she and her son disappearing through the massive door, the wind covering their screams as they plummeted to their deaths. The room was deathly quiet, as everyone digested what had just happened. Lord Royce huffed in annoyance, flicking the blood from his blade as he unsheathed his weapon. "Close the damn door," he ordered, glaring at a nearby knight who hastily moved forward to do as he was told. Royce then turned to Harold, who was gazing at the door, pale. "Sectful Harold, you were next in line after your cousin. You must now lead the Vale," Royce rumbled. Harold looked up into the gray eyes of the older lord. He nodded slightly. "I will," he promised. Lord Royce, ignoring the blood and gore on the floor, knelt before Harold, bowing his head. "Hail, Lord Harold, Arryn, Lord of the Vale," he declared. Almost as one, everyone in the chamber knelt as well, echoing the statement. Harold looked around the room, unsure of how to feel or what to do. He nodded nervously. "Rise, please," he said, his voice sounding overly loud. When everyone was back on their feet, Lord Redfort was the first to speak. "What are your orders, my lord?" he asked. Harold glanced at Royce, who nodded firmly. The young warrior and new lord of the Eyrie gripped the hilt of his blade. "My lords, assemble your men. We have friends in the Riverlands waiting for us." Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, woke with a start. The last thing he remembered before waking up was being drugged and dragged out of his cell by 2 men who spoke with distinct Essosi accents. Eddard had been awaiting his trial in the Black Cells after being betrayed by the whoremonger, Baelish, and being turned over to the Lannisters like a common criminal. While in the Black Cells, his knee had festered, causing the older lord more and more pain, all while he worried about the state of Westeros. Before he had been thrown in cells, his household had been slaughtered. Sansa had been captured by the Queen, Arya had run off, and Robb was calling the banners of the North. Eddard looked around, trying to figure out just exactly where he had been brought. The room was clean and airy, with the sun shining through a high window. His bed was comfortable, built low to the ground. His knee, now wrapped in bandages, was propped up on a mound of pillows and blankets. Amazingly, it no longer ached but felt numb. A welcome reprieve for the aged lord. Lord Stark's hand came up to his face. Feeling his beard and hair, both had grown untamed and wild, meaning that some time had passed since being taken from the Black Cells. The door opened up to reveal a small, mousy man with a mop of curly hair and a pleasant face. He grinned when he saw Eddard awake, setting down the tray he had been carrying on a nearby table. "Lord Stark, it is good to finally see you awake," he said happily, pulling a stool up next to the bed. He pressed a cool hand to Ned's head and throat, nodding slightly. "It seems you made it through the fever." "Fever?" Eddard asked, his voice raspy. The man quickly handed the Lord of Winterfell a mug of water. "Drink slowly," he instructed. Eddard nodded and sipped the cool water, savoring the feeling of it running down his neck. When he was finished, he handed the mug back to the man, nodding his head. "Thank you," he said gratefully. "Now, who are you and what do you mean by fever?" he asked. The man gestured to Eddard's knee. "Your knee was badly infected, my lord. When you were brought to me, I feared I was going to have to take the leg itself, but you Starks seem to be made of sterner stuff," he said with a grin. "The infection in your body gave you a nasty fever, one of the worst I'd ever seen. You were unconscious for weeks. I did all I could to coax you through it, keeping you cool and hydrated, trying to keep your body healthy enough to fight off the terrible sickness. Once in a while you would start shouting in your sleep, scaring the 7 hells out of me more often than not." "What did I say?" Eddard asked, trying to keep the heart-stopping fear from showing on his face. The man made a vague gesture with his hand. "You mentioned your daughters, Sansa and Arya, your son Robb. Once you mentioned your late sister Lyanna, and the promise you made to her," he explained. Eddard felt a cold chill run down his spine. "Did I mention what promise?" he asked, worriedly. The man shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "It seems even your unconscious mind was determined to keep that secret." He moved down towards Eddard's knee and began unwrapping the bandages. "Your knee gave the first indication that the worst was over. I noticed it began to heal a few days ago. The same night, your fever broke. I knew that it was only a matter of days before you finally woke up," He took a moment to devote his attention to the injured knee, moving the joint gently as he made sure the knee was healing correctly. When he was satisfied, he quickly changed the bandages, wiping a thick, slightly yellow paste on the first bandage he put on. "This is a concoction I created when I was at the Citadel," he explained. "It's a jelly form of milk of the poppy. Just as maesters use the liquid form as a painkiller, the gel does the same, numbing the injury so that it can both heal properly and not cause the person pain." Eddard nodded. "Thank you," he said again. "Cersei was very literal when she said she wanted to let me rot in the black cells," he japed dryly. The small man laughed lightly at his joke. "Unfortunately for her, it seems your knee will heal just fine. Lord Stark, you will be able to walk again." His face then became very stern. "However, your body just overcame a terrible ordeal that would have killed most men. You are not fully healed, and it will take some time before you are. Until I say otherwise, you must walk with the aid of a cane and must be very careful with what you do. No riding, no running obviously, no weapon work. You cannot put that leg under any sort of pressure until I say otherwise," he said, his voice full of authority and command. Eddard nodded dutifully. "I understand," he said. "You never answered what your name was." The man smiled and extended his hand. "Tomas," he said pleasantly. Eddard took his hand and shook it. "Thank you, Tomas," he said gratefully. "Now, where am I?"
"You're in Braavos."
A strong voice came from the doorway. A man was leaning in the doorway. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a muscular frame. His hair, a dark gray color, was worn long, with a single braid running down the center. His beard was the same color and covered his jaw, gathered under his chin in a tight knot. "Tomas, give us some privacy," he ordered. The small healer nodded and left, leaving the two men alone. The new man closed the door behind him and grabbed Tomas's stool, placing it in front of Eddard. "Nice to meet you, Lord Stark." Eddard raised an eyebrow. "Who are you?" he asked. "How did I get to Braavos?" The man held up a hand, stopping the flow of questions from the injured Stark. "Allow me to speak to Lord Stark, and I will explain everything," he promised. "You were rescued by my agents in King's Landing, placed there when we discovered that you were named Hand of the King. We watched your tenure with a cautious eye. As you know, Starks are not known to flourish in the South," he said this, with a knowing look. There was something in the man's voice that made Eddard think that he knew more than he let on. "When my agents told me that you had been betrayed by the Master of Coin, Petachibalish, and taken prisoner, I knew I had to act quickly," the man continued. "I told my men to take you here, to Braavos, for your own protection. Since you have arrived, my personal healer, Tomas, has been watching over you at my instruction," he finished. "He is the best healer in all of Essos. You are in great hands." Eddard took in all this information with a thoughtful face. "Why did you save me?" he asked. That was the biggest question on his mind. Why bring me here? Why heal me? The man smirked slightly. "Lord Stark, I will get to that in a second," he said, dodging Eddard's question. "First, we must speak about your sons." Eddard raised an eyebrow. "Sons? What about them? Is Robb all right?" he asked, suddenly worried that something had happened. The man chuckled. "Quite well, my lord. When your imprisonment was announced, your son Robb came south with the might of the North, helping free the northern riverlands from a host commanded by the Kingslayer. After an impressive display or daring, your son routed the Lannister army and showed himself to be a dangerous player in the war. That is when your bastard appears. He rode all the way from the wall to stand by his brother's side." "He deserted the Watch," Eddard said worriedly. The man shook his head. "Not so. According to my sources and the boy himself, he left the Watch before ever taking the Black. Do not worry, my lord. He is no deserter." Eddard's breathing came down as the man said this, relieved that Jon would not be executed. Unfortunately, a new worry appeared in the back of his mind as he thought about his sister and what might happen to the boy.
"Go on," Eddard said.
As Robb treated with Renly, who had declared himself king, and his friends in the Stormlands and the Reach, the Blackfish and Jon took the fight to the Westerlands. Things get a little hazy in Robb's case, as Renly was murdered, and Robb himself was injured. Thankfully, your son pulled through and managed to gain the loyalty of newly free Reach and Stormlands, while in the north, Jon made a name for himself as the White Wolf, the man explained. Eddard frowned. "Pledged their loyalty?" he asked, confused. "What do you mean? They allied with Robb?" The man smiled slightly. Vassal is more likely, my lord. You see, in order to save face, Joffrey and his mother murdered a man who bears a passing resemblance to yourself, claiming it was you. Westeros bought it, and in the aftermath of learning of your passing, the lords of the North and Riverlands declared Robb king in the North. Eddard was speechless. How could Robb become king? Stannis was Robert's rightful heir. Not even Renly, though Eddard held no ill will towards him, had the right to wear the crown. What happened to Stannis? He is Robert's rightful heir, he asked. The man grimaced. Understandable, but Robert's brother was not well liked, and had also turned to a foreign religion. According to your son, he was also responsible for Renly's murder. Again, the facts are hazy as to Stannis' death, but he too died the night before he was about to face off against Robb in battle. Hence how your son claimed the loyalty of the Stormlords. The man stopped, collecting his thoughts for a moment. My lord, I will explain as quickly as possible, but only if you do not interrupt me. I will do my best to answer all your questions after. Eddard nodded. Of course, please, explain. The man took a deep breath and dove into the story. I will admit, there is not much left to tell. For whatever reason, Theon Greyjoy returned to his father, and the Ironborn attacked the north. This happened while Robb was in the Reach. Theon, who was helping lead the invasion, also took Winterfell. In an effort to protect the north, the Blackfish, who was leading the force of Northmen and Riverlanders, sent Lord Bolton and the Freys north to help. The man sighed. Tywin Lannister convinced both houses to turn their cloaks. Bolton's bastard took Winterfell, capturing Lady Stark and Theon Greyjoy before burning the castle to the ground. It is unknown what happened to the rest of your family, my lord, but the Ironborn who followed the Greyjoy boy were all burned to a crisp. Your sons learned of the treachery when Robb returned to River Run with his new allies of Reachmen and Stormlords. Here is what the current situation is now. Robb marches towards Harrenhal to face Tywin. Jon Snow and the Blackfish are marching north, most likely to take back the north, and Lord Tarly marches west to finish Sir Bryndon's conquest of the Westerlands. Oh, and the Martells seem to have joined the Lannister cause for reasons unknown. Eddard ran a hand through his greasy hair, trying to wrap his mind around all that had happened while he had been away. It seems that months have gone by while he had been in a long, feverish sleep. His sons were fighting not only the Lanceltors but the Greyjoys and Boltons as well. Robb had been named king, and Jon now commanded a host of his own. To make matters more confusing, Tywin Bloody Lannister somehow convinced the Martells, who have a blood feud against the man, to fight for him. It was all so much to understand in a short time span. A knock on the door interrupted the two men's conversation. It was Thomas, and he was pushing a strange contraption that looked like a chair on wheels. He had a regretful look on his face. Lord Captain, my lord, the others have assembled, he said, nodding towards the mysterious man. The dark-haired man nodded. It would seem this discussion will have to wait for a short moment. My lord, he gestured to Thomas. Bring the chair forward. With a grunt, the man slipped his arms under Eddard, lifting him slightly and moving him so that he sat in the chair. When he was seated, he elevated on leg rest, so that Eddard's injured leg was straightened. What is this? Eddard asked, looking up at Thomas. The young man grinned like a child with a new toy. It's an invention of the imps, my lord, he explained. It's a mobile chair. The man invented for your son Bran, and the Lord Captain's agents sent a drawing to me. It's ingenious, and I'm rather dumbfounded why others hadn't thought of it sooner. Thomas, please bring Lord Stark out to the balcony. I will be there shortly, the man ordered, striding out of the room. The young healer pushed the Lord of Winterfell through the halls of the building, which were as large and airy as the room he was just in. The walls were adorned with pieces of art and trophies of past battles, mainly ragged banners. After a few twists and turns, Thomas pushed Eddard out onto a balcony that looked out over Braavos. To his right was the Palace of the Sea Lord, a majestic and pristine-looking building that made the Red Keep seem like a log cabin. In front of him stood a large, heavily guarded building that Eddard couldn't place. The Iron Bank, Thomas said, following Eddard's eyeline. He then pointed off to the left, and just in the distance there, you can see the Titan. Indeed, the healer was correct. The vast stone warrior could be seen, his feet hidden in a thick blanket of fog. What is this place? Eddard asked. They were no doubt in the central part of the city, where many of the richest merchants and lords would be located. The building seemed to take up several blocks and was built several stories high. "This is Snowfall, my personal estate," the man said, walking up from behind Thomas and Eddard. A small group of men and a woman followed him, all wearing armor with weapons at their sides. The man himself now wore armor, with the chest plate covered with a plain white tabard. Eddard nodded to the man. "A beautiful home," he complimented. "Now who are you?" The man bowed low. "I am the leader of the Company of the Rose, and these are my lieutenants." Eddard's eyes went wide, then narrowed. "Company of the Rose?" he said curiously. "You're Northmen." The man nodded. "Indeed we are. We are cousins, distant relatives, to many of the northern houses. We came to Essos when Torrhen Stark bent the knee to Aegon Targaryen. But not because we refused to bend the knee, but because we were ordered to." Eddard raised an eyebrow. "Ordered? Why would Torrhen order his people to leave?" he asked. The man placed his hands behind his back as he began to explain. "Torrhen feared that Aegon would go back on his word and attack the north with his dragons. So, thinking of the safety of his people and his family, he ordered every family in the north to send a second or third son, even a cousin if need be, to Winterfell. There, Torrhen formed the Company of the Rose. They were given 2 instructions. The first, survive as a mercenary group. We had to keep up the act and take on contracts. We only accepted deals where we knew we would win and not take too much of a beating. Our second command was this: to return to Westeros when the North finally had a Stark king again. Your son Robb has been named king, and we mean to pledge our loyalty to him as was commanded of us over 300 years ago." The man ripped off his tabard, revealing the dire wolf emblazoned on his breastplate, the same that Eddard wore on his own. "Torrhen's youngest son, Rickard, was put in charge of the company. He was my ancestor. I am Darren Stark, leader of the Company of the Rose, simply known as Darren to the rulers of the free cities," he explained. "And these are my companions." The woman stepped forward first. "Aulor Mormont," she said gruffly. She certainly had all the characteristics of a Mormont. Tall, broad, and had a spiked mace swinging below her bear cloak. The next man was nearly a giant, with a massive stone mallet slung across his back that looked like it would take 2 grown men to lift. "Duan Umber," he declared, striking his chest. One by one, each person stepped forward, stating their name. Cameron Glover, Bryn Karstark, Septon Manderly, Micah Hornwood, Dennis Dustin, Jared Flint. Finally, there were only a handful of men left who hadn't stepped forward. Darren gestured for the first man to step forward. He nodded slightly to Eddard, his voice almost a whisper. "Maxar Bolton," he said before stepping back. Darren gestured for another man to step forward. He was slightly built, like Thomas, but had a quiet confidence about him. He too talked quietly, but not in the same whisper voice as Maxar. "Alec Reed, Master of Spies," he said. Finally, there left only 6 men. Darren spoke again. "As you know, many houses have gone extinct in the north since Torrhen bent the knee. These men are all that remain of those houses. This is Jorah Fisher, Warner Frost, Carson Ryder," he nodded to Thomas, "Thomas Greenwood, and finally Trevor Redstark and Doran Greystark." Eddard couldn't believe it. For years he had felt as if the North had been missing something. He had seen the numbers, going all the way back to the king who knelt, and felt as if they were off. Now it all made sense. Tyrion had weakened the North immensely when he sent off so many people to Essos. But now it had proved fruitful. Not only were weaker houses like Bolton and Dustin stronger than before, but houses that had gone extinct like Ryder, Frost, and Fisher were back in the fold as well. "This is unexpected," Eddard said, trying to find words. "What should I call you? Lords? Captains?" he asked. Darren shook his head. "Our given names are fine for now," he said easily. "If we must be addressed by a title, let it be Captain," he said. Eddard nodded. "Very well. Now that I know who you are, what do you plan to do now that Robb is king?" he asked. Darren leaned against the railing, crossing his arms. "We will return to the land of our ancestors. We will travel to Westeros and lay our swords at the feet of Robb Stark and declare him our king." He gestured to the man named Jorah Fisher. "When we heard that Robb had been declared king, Jorah commissioned 50 warships to be built here in Braavos. They are almost done, the finished ships hiding just north of here, in a cove. 50 warships, all capable of carrying the company across the narrow sea to Westeros. Eddard nodded. I see, he said quietly. Where will you land? Robb is in the Riverlands. We will land in the north and help Jon Snow retake your homeland from the Boltons and Greyjoys before heading south to meet with your son, Daeron explained. When do we leave? Eddard asked, clearly anxious to return home. Daeron raised a hand. Peace, cousin. We still have many ships to finish. Another 2 weeks or more will see them completed. Then we will sail in all haste. There is another thing you should know. Eddard looked at the Eastern Wolf, already bombarded with information. What? He asked. Word has been sent from our informants in Pentos. It seems that the last remaining Targaryen, Daenerys, has managed to create an army out of the usse Sellswords companies. The Golden Company, the Company of the Cat, the Longlances, the Second Sons, the Stormcrows, the Windblown, and all the rest. To top it all off, she also has more than 1,000 Dothraki screamers at her back and 8,000 unsullied. He informed Eddard she managed to swindle Pentos out of its fleet and now sails for Westeros. She also somehow has 3 dragons. Eddard leaned forward in his seat, unsure if he had heard his cousin clearly. 3 dragons? He asked. Impossible. Dragons have been gone from this world for generations. Even still, cousin, this is the truth, Daeron said, not backing down. But there is no reason to panic. The dragons are just babies, not even the size of dogs. The Targaryen girl will not attack Westeros with the creatures that helped Aegon the Conqueror. If she wants to use her dragons in battle, then she must wait a year or more before they can even be a credible threat on the battlefield. He explained. Eddard looked at him. How do you know this? He asked curiously. Dragon lore was not a well-known subject in Westeros. When Aegon Targaryen invaded Westeros, his family had already been on Dragonstone for more than a century, raising the 3 dragons. Any knowledge that they had tried to bring from Valyria was long gone. Daeron made a vague gesture with his hand. I've served as the leader of the Company of the Rose for 10 years now, serving under my father for 15. I have been all over Essos in that time. I read a lot about dragon lore when I visited Genki while on an assignment. The Shadowlands to the east of there are said to be the original home of the dragons before the Valyrians found them, he explained. However, we still have the advantage. No one in Westeros knows of her arrival, except the Spider, who I have always suspected of being a Targaryen loyalist. No one but us. When we deal with the Lannisters, then we can prepare for the Targaryen girl and her dragons, helped greatly by the knowledge learned in Genki. Eddard was impressed. It seems Daeron had this all planned out. All right then, we leave in 2 weeks, he said. He hoped that by then, his knee would be healed, and he would be able to fight. Thomas must have been reading his thoughts. In 2 weeks, you should be able to at least stand with a cane, and if you're very lucky, without one. However, I know that you will want to start training as soon as possible. That is why Alex's agents grabbed this before they left the Red Keep, he said, producing a large object wrapped in brown cloth. With a flourish, the small healer revealed the object. Eddard gasped. Ice, he said quietly. It was the ancestral sword of the Starks, thought to be taken by Cersei during the attack on his household in the Tower of the Hand. Now the giant sword was handed to him, wolf pelt sheath and all. I never thought I would put my hands on the hilt again. Daeron nodded. The message sent to your son Robb said that Ice was still in the possession of House Lannister. A lie, of course, to deceive both her father and Robb. Trying to give House Lannister as much leverage as possible, much more than they actually had, he explained. For an instant, Daeron's eyes flickered upwards, behind Eddard, before coming down again. But the sword was not all we took that belonged to you. Father! A small voice cried out before slamming into the good side. Tears sprang up in Eddard's eyes as he embraced his daughter, stroking her hair softly as he whispered in her ear. Oh yeah, line break. Hey all! I know that this is virtually the same chapter that I put out in my first attempt at this story, but I felt really good about this chapter when I first wrote it. I thought it was a really cool way to reintroduce Ned and the Company of the Rose. Also, this is for whoever wrote the 2-minute comment. I got a nice chuckle out of that. Have a good one. King Bellaram, Robb 16th. Robb crossed his arms, standing at the end of the table, as his council chatted quietly, putting out battle plans and strategies. Robb was no longer surrounded by his Northmen or Riverlanders, but instead was surrounded by a much smaller council made up of Lord Gregor Forrester, Sarah Donnell Swan, Lord Bryce Caron, and Garlon. His Northmen and Riverlanders were north at the Twins, and the other Reacher lords were in the west with Tarly. All Robb had were the Stormlords, some 20,000 Reachmen under Garland's command, and another 1,000 Northmen under Lord Forrester's command. While Robb's mind should have been on the battle ahead, he could not stop thinking about the argument he and Margaery had before he left Riverrun.
Line break.
Robb was having Olyvar finish his armor when Margaery had burst in, looking none too pleased. The young king had thanked Olyvar for his help, and had sent the boy away to saddle his horse before Margaery unleashed on him. The Rose of Highgarden had given the boy a sweet smile before closing the door behind. When she turned back towards Robb, she wasn't smiling. "When were you going to tell me that I'm staying here?" she asked angrily. Robb leaned against his desk, frowning. "I thought we had an understanding," he said. "We spoke about it on the ride from the Reach. When I go to fight, you stay behind. You are marching towards Harrenhal. Surely there is a castle far closer than Riverrun that I can stay at." Margaery countered. Robb shook his head. "There isn't," he said firmly. "At least not one that I would trust leaving you."
Margaery frowned.
"What's the point of guards then?" Garland had placed 3 of his best knights to protect his sister, and Robb had added to that by ordering the rest of Renly's Kingsguard. Sir Emmon Q, Sir Gayard Morrigan, and Sir Parman Crane, to protect his new wife. That made 8 capable knights protecting the new queen in the north. "The point of guards is to keep you free from blades in the dark," Robb answered. "Margaery, you mean more to me than you can possibly understand. I would have you by my side every moment of every day. But that is simply not the case right now," Robb said passionately. "If you were to be harmed because you were near the battlefield, then not only would I blame myself, but I would have 2 of my most capable warriors, your brothers, doubting me. That is something I cannot have, now more than ever." Margaery was taken back by Robb's heartfelt words. She knew her new husband was never afraid to say what was on his mind, but she had never seen him so openly speak about her with such care and love. She bowed her head. "Thank you, Robb," she said quietly. Robb walked up to her, lifting her head so that her eyes met his. "Don't worry," he said with a slight smile. "I will return." "How can you be sure?" Margaery asked. "I am the young wolf," Robb joked. "The young dragon come again." His smile faded but was somehow filled with more love. "I also have a great girl waiting for me. One I will return to." "And who might this girl be, my lord?" Margaery asked quietly, finding her face very close to Robb's. "Oh, I think you know who she is," Robb said before pulling Margaery in for a deep kiss. The two stayed in the embrace for a long time before a knock at the door broke them from it. They looked at each other, smiles plastered on their red and out-of-breath faces. "My lord, your horse is ready, and the lords are waiting in the courtyard," Olyvar called, his voice carrying through the door. Robb chuckled. "It seems I must go." His smile faded. "I am sorry we did not get to spend much time together, my love." Margaery sighed quietly, resting a hand on Robb's face, running her fingers through his beard. "You are a king and a warrior," she said. "As much as you are mine, you also belong out there to those who fly your banners." Robb nodded. "So it would seem." Margaery kissed him again. "Return to me, please," she whispered, resting her forehead on his. "I promise," Robb whispered back. Line break. "Where do you plan to meet Tywin, my lord?" Sir Donald asked curiously. "Our scouts have not reported any host moving from Harrenhal east, west, or north," Robb said after a moment. "It seems the lion means to fight us on his terms. We have no choice but to comply." "Cut! That does not seem wise, your grace," Lord Forrester said honestly. "Tyrion is feared for a reason. He will have a trap ready." Robb nodded to the man. "As I expect he would," he answered. "Tywin is outnumbered, my lord. I did not expect him to meet me in the open field, but for me to come to him. The one thing we can be sure of is that he will not hide in Harrenhal." "How do we know that?" Garland asked. "Because if he does, then I will simply trap him there," Robb explained. "He cannot afford to stay behind his walls, nor can he afford to march out. He will stay close to Harrenhal, at an area of his choosing, and fight us there." "So how will we face him?" Lord Caron asked. "It all depends on how Tywin positions himself, my lord," Robb said with a shrug. He will do his best to take away our advantage of numbers, funnel ourselves towards him. How do you know that? Sir Donal asked. For Garland, Donal and Caron, this was their first time in an actual war council with their king. They were surprised by how he has been able to easily predict what the enemy will and will not do. For Lord Forrester, he was enjoying the other men's shock and wonder. Because that's what I would do, Robb answered firmly. My lords, we will deal with Tywin when we reach him. We will be diligent. We will be careful. Tywin expects me to march towards, green as grass and full of bravado. He expects me to be arrogant and stupid. Trust me when I say that the old lion will get a very unwelcome surprise.
My lords, what of the rumors that a large cavalry host has joined the Lannisters? Lord Forrester asked.
Sir John Fossaway has sent reports that the lords of the Crownlands have been strengthened by more men. Perhaps the Lannisters ordered a mercenary company. Now that host is in Harrenhal, Robb said easily. At most, it's another 20,000 men. We still have 5,000 more swords than him. That is an advantage I mean to use. Robb looked down at the map, noticing where the red pieces were and where his yellow and green pieces were. Because the Crownlander lords had marched north to join Tywin, the number of pieces was more or less the same amount. The young king had hoped to keep the 2-1 advantage over the lion, but it seems like the young wolf's luck with the gods had come to an end. He had to rely on himself now. That will be all for today, my lords, Robb said. We will meet again before we march into battle. Once we have full knowledge of what we face and where they are. The others nodded and filed out, except for Garland, who was making a habit of staying back after meetings. When the two were alone, Robb poured them both wine, handing a goblet to the man. Something on your mind? He asked curiously. Your Grace, Garland started before Robb cut him off. Please, Garland. We are alone, and are now brothers. Call me Robb, Robb stated firmly.
Robb, Garland said with a smile.
When Margaery came looking for you, she was quite cross. I hope you two didn't part on bad terms. Robb shook his head. She was mad, but we fixed it. Thankfully, my sister has always been extremely level-headed. Garland said with a chuckle. My grandmother would have whacked you with her cane. Robb chuckled as well. All the better I didn't marry her then, he joked. The two men shared a laugh as they finished their drinks. Garland had taken an older brother-type role with Robb, one that both of them had fallen into naturally. As Robb had always been the eldest, it had been nice to have an older sibling for a change. Do you think we will win? Robb asked. Garland placed his cup back on the table, tapping the silver thoughtfully. I believe we can, if you lead us, he said finally. When word of your victory over the Kingslayer reached us, even Tarly was impressed. As I'm sure you've probably heard, I thought that you got lucky, as did Renly, but then you fought the demon. Robb grimaced and rolled his shoulders, still remembering the pain that he had felt for weeks after fighting the damn thing. Riding and walking, simple day-to-day activities had been painful. He was thankful that his back was now fully healed. I will admit, not my smartest decision, Robb said. Garland chuckled grimly. That is when I knew that you were more than just a young northern noble. You were special. Robb smiled. Perhaps it was luck, Robb countered. But with the phrase and the Boltons, it seems my luck has run out. Garland got up from his seat, putting a hand on Robb's shoulder. Do not give up just yet, brother. We'll need just a bit more of that Stark luck. With that, the Tyrell Knight walked out of the room, leaving the young king with a lot to think about before he faces the most dangerous man in Westeros. Robb the young king looked over the battle map, envisioning how the battle will go tomorrow. They were a mile from Harrenhal, and had found Tywin's host spread out to the east of the great fortress on the King's Road. They were a safe distance from the God's Eye, just as Robb expected they would. From the looks of it, they intended to meet Robb's host head-on, with the antlers being their fallback plan. Robb's plan had been simple. Garland and Loras would be on the left flank with the majority of the heavy cavalry. Their only purpose was to turn Tywin's flank and force the Lannister host towards the lake. Lord Caron would be on Robb's right flank. His job, if possible, was to help turn the Lannister host as well by giving up land. Essentially, Robb's plan was to have the two armies turn like a wheel. Robb would start with his back to the north, and would hopefully have the battle end with his back to the east as his army forces the enemy into the lake. Sir Donal would control the front and Lord Wilde would control the vanguard. Finally, Lord Estermont would have command of the reserves. Lucas Blackwood one of the few Riverlanders still left with Robb, had command of the archers. The young king hoped that his men would be enough to defeat the Lannister host. They had been reinforced by a host from the Crownlands, but Robb hoped that the men of the Stormlands and Reach would account for themselves better than the Crownlanders would. "Your Grace?" Daisy Mormont asked, poking her head into the tent. Robb turned, surprised to see the warrior woman. She and Smalljon usually liked to drink before a battle. "Yes, Daisy." She jerked her head outside. "Come have a drink with us." Robb looked back at the battle map before shrugging and following his friend outside, where more of his battle guard were sitting around a fire, talking quietly and drinking. There was Garland, Robert Royce, Smalljon, and Brienne. The heir to Last Hearth was teaching the second son of Mace Tyrell how to quaff, which the Reachman was having little success with, but it made Smalljon happy. They all nodded as Robb joined the group, accepting a tankard from Smalljon. "Thank you. Do you think we will win tomorrow, Your Grace?" Robar asked curiously. Robb nodded slowly. "I think if we can execute the plan of forcing Tywin into the lake, then yes. If not, then it'll be a long day of fighting. Then it's on to King's Landing and that royal bastard Joffrey." Smalljon rumbled, "Cowardly cunt." "Do you mean to take the Iron Throne when we take the capital?" Rubber asked. The group went silent after the Vale Knight asked his question, looking at their king. The Northerners hadn't considered the possibility that their king would stay in the south, but obviously the Southern Knights thought he might. Robb shook his head. "I haven't decided yet," Robb answered, gazing evenly at the Valemon. "But I may end up doing so." "What about the North?" Daisy asked. Robb pursed his lips. "I have full faith Jon can retake the North," he answered. "I'm not sure what might happen, but if need be, my mother or Jon will become regent of the region. If my brothers somehow survive the fire, then they shall take over as Lord of Winterfell when they are old enough. If not, then I will legitimize Jon and he will take over as Lord of Winterfell. Either way, House Stark will rule the North and Winterfell." "First we must deal with Tywin," Brienne said abruptly, going slightly red as she realized that she might have just spoken over the king. Robb smiled grimly, nodding to her. "Indeed, we must first deal with Tywin. Brienne, have you ever thought about visiting Bear Island?" The large warrior woman shook her head. "No, Your Grace," she answered quietly. "You should. The women of the island are quite impressive," Robb said, nudging Daisy slightly, who had a proud look on her face. "They all learn how to fight. I must apologize for not introducing you to Lady Midge when I had the chance at Riverrun." Brienne looked between Robb and Daisy. "It would be my honor to visit Bear Island," she answered before looking down at her boots. The woman was a curious case to Robb. She was ferocious with a sword, and seemed to be extremely loyal to whoever held her loyalty, but she seemed hesitant for whatever reason. Robb wasn't sure why, and hoped that she would soon grow out of it. She could be a very capable captain of his, just as Daisy and Smalljon had become. "How did you become a warrior, my lady?" Garland asked curiously. Brienne looked up at the knight. "My father had a few other children, a son and 2 daughters, before he had me, but all died young. When I was born, I was always bigger than other children and wanted to fight from an early age. After I came back one day with more than a few bruises, my father decided that I should learn properly how to fight." She patted the hilt of her sword. "I began my training the next day." "A wise decision on your father's part," Garland complimented. "Indeed," Robbar agreed. "Your duel with Ser Loras was quite impressive." Brienne went red in the face again from all of the praise. Obviously she was not used to others applauding her skill. She nodded to the 2 men. "You are kind, good sirs," she said awkwardly. The group came to a companionable silence as they all drank and looked into the fire, enjoying each other's company the night before the battle. They were not stupid. There was every chance that any one of them could die tomorrow, but tonight they would spend in each other's company. "Your Grace, what was your father like?" Garland asked. "Lord Stark?" Robbar asked. "My father always said that he was one of the greatest men that he's ever met. Honorable, fiercely loyal to friends, and simply a great man. Lord Stark was beloved in the North," Daisy added. "He always put his people and bannermen first, looking out for their needs. There are few who could rule the North, as he did. He's also a great warrior," Smalljon said, his voice a little slurred from drinking. "My father always said that Lord Stark was one of the deadliest men that Westeros never knew about." Didn't he face 3 Kingsguard when he went looking for his sister after Robert's rebellion? Robb asked. My father said he went south after lifting the siege of Storm's End. Robb nodded. He did, he said quietly. He and 6 companions versus Oswell, when Gerald Hightower, and Arthur Dane. He lived, so he must have beaten one of them, Robb commented. Say what you will about the Mad King, but none can see he didn't have a truly impressive 7. 2 of the arguably best to ever live in Sel and Dane. It's a shame their talent was wasted on a madman. What did Lord Stark think of the South? Garland asked suddenly, looking over at his good brother. Robb pursed his lips. My father wasn't fond of the South, he answered honestly. He was fine in the Vale, where he felt a kinship with the men and women there, but for other places, he did not prefer to exchange flowery words that had no meaning. He said what needed to be said, and was a man of action above all things. Robb smiled slightly. He once told my mother that words don't keep you warm in the winter. Garland nodded. Aye, they probably don't, he agreed. The Reach has always been full of flowery words, as your father put it. The singers say that chivalry was born in the Reach, but I think that's just more talk. Robb patted the man on the back. I'm not so sure. Lord Tarley certainly isn't much of a talker. Garland chuckled. Randall Tarley is granite made flesh, he joked. But I mean what I say. Words have always been as good as currency in the South, especially the Reach. Perhaps a new king on the throne may change that. One that has the courage that says what needs to be said, like his father before him. Daisy laughed. Any Stark can take a group of criminals and turn them into the most good-hearted people in Westeros. I'd stake my life on that. Being around good people brings out the good in others. Wise words, my lady, Robber said. Robb looked around at his friends. For a time, it didn't feel like they were at war at all, but a group of friends simply sitting around a fire and talking. It was a surreal moment that right before the most dangerous battle that many of them had ever faced, they were simply sitting and talking. The young king got up, finishing off the last of his ale. You should all find your beds, he said. We'll need our strength for tomorrow, when we finally face the old lion. The others all nodded and finished off their tankards, save for Small John, who polished off his ale, then poured himself another and drank that too. One by one, they all walked away to find their beds. Small John and Daisy were the last to leave, clasping arms with their king, their northern king, before walking off. Robb walked back into his tent, finding the letter that he had set off to the side. He unrolled it, rereading the words he had read more than a dozen times, still not believing what he was reading. My love. I have spoken with the maester here in River Run. I am with child. Come back alive. For me and our child. All my love. Margaret.